トビデオ
In 1983, author Hideyuki Kikuchi had just finished work on his quickly well-received debut novel, Demon City Shinjuku, and was already gearing up for a brand new idea. As one could tell from a title such as Demon City Shinjuku, Kikuchi was definitely a horror hound. He has gone on the record that he has drawn influences from the likes of Bram Stoker and H.P. Lovecraft. But to him, his first true love affair with the genre came in the form of the old Hammer horror classics starring the likes of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Kikuchi wanted his next novel to be a sort of tribute to the films that inspired him in his youth, but with an added twist to the mixture. Combining elements of western, science fiction, post-apocalypse fiction, and samurai stories, Kikuchi created a simple story about a mysterious vampire hunter cloaked in black, wandering a post-nuclear fallout world where demons and creatures of the night slither through the miasma, and the only pockets of humanity are firmly under control of a proud and corrupt race of vampires simply known as the Nobles. This story was a massive hit right out of the gates thanks to its atmospheric yet terse prose, alongside the breathtakingly beautiful illustrations of future Final Fantasy artist Yoshitaka Amano. Coinciding with the release of this novel was also the beginning of the OVA market, and thanks to its popularity alongside its TV-unfriendly violence, the book was instantly a target for OVA producers. The OVA was one of the first to begin production with a primarily male audience in mind. Helming the project was the late great director Toyo Ashida. Ashida was already doing well with directing the Fist of the North Star series, but here he had bigger ambitions. Ashida wanted to make a game changer of an anime, going so far as to say that people who had been tired from studying or working hard all day would enjoy watching this anime instead of watching something that would make them, quote, feel even more tired. So with him at the helm, alongside Kikuchi supervising and Amano assisting with the character design, they set out to make a hauntingly good adaptation. And in 1985, the OVA was released both in theaters and on Laserdisc simultaneously, under the title which we now know as Vampire Hunter D. Along with Akira, Dirty Pair, and Project A-ko, Vampire Hunter D was one of the early titans that anime fans of the West sunk their teeth into. When Streamline first brought it over in 1992 and marketed as the first animated horror film for adults, it became one of their flagship titles overnight. And if you couldn't get it on VHS, Vampire Hunter D was also a staple of late-night TV movies, with airings on TBS, Sci-Fi, and even Cartoon Network on occasion. For a while, Vampire Hunter D was synonymous with the medium of anime in America, and how far it could go as an artistic medium.
It's a dramatic form of animation. Subject and material may be graphic and provocative at times. Vampire Hunter D, next.
Yet nowadays, people barely talk about it. People still give praise to Akira and Project A-ko, but Vampire Hunter D has kind of gone into pop cultural limbo. People may know of it and its impact overseas, but you really don't see people write entire articles of why this anime is a shining example of classic anime from the 80s. And I can answer that question for you quite simply. Vampire Hunter D isn't all that good. Vampire Hunter D is one of the victims of the sands of time. When held up to a modern lens, one does not see a groundbreaking work from a golden age, but a simple adaptation weighed down by its own budget and shoddy direction. Even for its time, Vampire Hunter D was slightly above average at best when compared to other movies and OVAs that came out that same year. So, happy Halloween everyone, we're going as an iconoclast this year. But before we can dissect Vampire Hunter D, we need to understand what exactly the story of the anime is, so here's a quick plot rundown. Doris Lang, the daughter of a deceased werewolf hunter, is attacked by Count Magnus Lee, a 10,000-year-old noble who wishes to make her his new vampire bride. To prevent this from happening, she hires the mysterious drifter and vampire hunter, our titular D.
You know why they call him that?
Why they call him D?
Because he's got that D!
They go into town along with Doris's younger brother Dan for supplies, and there Doris is confronted by the mayor's less than savory dandy son, Greco-Roman. Yep, that's his real name. Greco promises to help Doris in exchange for being his and his alone, and Doris responds like any sane woman would do to that offer.
You're so adorable when you're being self-righteous, I can't stand it. Now how about you shut up and... Oh, you little trollop! No one does that to me!
Greco, being a complete bitch, immediately responds to this by telling the whole town about Doris' situation and almost gets her committed to an asylum before Dee steps in and explains his business to the mayor. Later that night, their farm is attacked by Count Lee's daughter, Lamika, an incredibly proud noble who despises humans and Dampier, and Ray, a mutant who is also Count Lee's most capable servant. Dee fights them, but not before revealing to Doris that he's a Dampier, a half-vampire. The next day, Dee storms the castle to confront Count Lee, but is immediately captured by a group of snake women. While Dee is incapacitated, Ray and his cronies storm the farm and kidnaps Dora. Dee is finally able to escape the snake woman by tapping into his vampire powers and killing them. He immediately rescues Doris before she is killed by Lamika, who does not want a human as a stepmother, and they both escape the castle, killing Ray's cronies along the way. Later that night, Ray calls out Dee for a duel using Danny as collateral and attempts to cheat using a magic candle that weakens vampires. Turns out that candle was a fake, and Ray loses a hand in the incredibly one-sided match. While that is going on, Doris is lured into a trap but is rescued by Lamika of all people, who says that she no longer wants Doris dead, but she just wants her gone and tells her to leave town immediately. But before she can continue, Greco shows up with a real candle and incapacitates Lamika while he hopes to steal away Doris. But naturally, Dee and Dan show up at the right time and kick his ass to the curb. The next morning, Greco is confronted and killed by Ray, who uses the real candle to weaken Dee, allowing him to kill the vampire hunter with a wooden stake. Doris and Dan are then captured and taken back to the castle. Through reasons, yeah, we'll call them reasons for now, Dee is revived and immediately storms the castle, again, rescues Doris, again, and kills Count Lee, but not before implying some mysterious lineage that takes Count Lee by surprise.
It can't be. You, the offspring of our sacred ancestor.
With the castle destroyed and the terrible night banished in a very surrealistic scene that goes on for way too long, everyone lives happily ever after, and Dee rides out of town into the sunset just as mysteriously as he rode in. It's a simple story, but it's based on the first novel, which is meant to serve as the introduction to Dee and the world he lives and fights in, so it's to be expected that this story wouldn't be that complex. How the anime handles that story, however, well, let's put a pin in that for now and focus on the more technical aspects. You might notice that for a film or even for an OVA, it really doesn't have the budget for one. Character animation feels choppy at times, speed lines are used with wild abandon, some animations are obviously just cells being moved around, and tons, and I mean tons of repeated footage. You almost have to prepare yourself for how much repeated footage is just slapped everywhere in this anime, even in places where you least expect it. The most egregious example being this shot of Dee drawing his sword, which is used in every fight scene and is sometimes slapped in there so haphazardly it makes scenes feel incredibly sloppy and hard to follow. But there are some moments where the animation does kind of work under its limited budget. Vampire Hunter D is able to hide some of its budgetary constraints by playing up the gothic ambiance. Some scenes will have a color palette that emphasizes deep purples, shadowy blues, or dark crimsons, really helping set the atmosphere for the anime. Another more controversial method that Vampire Hunter D uses to work within its budget is the art of the slow, long pan. Some people who are familiar with this anime have criticized these shots as being padding, which they are, but I feel that they kind of work here. They not only establish our hero, but also help set the mood of the coming anime. The ambient soundtrack of Tetsuya Komura kind of helps that part as well. But sometimes the anime can cut loose and pour the money on a scene. It's a rare but welcome occurrence, and these scenes are the highlights of the film. The most noteworthy is Dee escaping Count Lee's castle with Doris for the first time, and he is just cutting through anything and anyone that can get in his way. So, I don't know, maybe we can give them a bit of a pass on animation. Despite a few hiccups, it seems like they were able to work within that budget for the most part, so we'll forgive them on that front. What can't be forgiven, however, is the editing. Bad editing is something you don't really notice unless you're either familiar with editing techniques or if it's exceptionally bad to the point of being distracting, i.e. Brian Mills jumping over a fence and taking 3 and 15 cuts. But I think the main reason why we don't notice the difference between good editing and bad editing is that we don't notice good editing. Good editing creates a rhythm that the audience can get lost in, help us get immersed in the story. In contrast, bad editing takes us out of the story, and this is the root of Vampire Hunter D's problem. Some of these edits are more obvious ways of getting around the budget, such as those clumsy stock footage shots I talked about a few paragraphs ago, but those are just the tip of the iceberg. In this anime, sloppy editing is actually used as a means to avoid potentially expensive fight scenes. Take, for example, when D is escaping the Snake Ladies. There's a lot of buildup of D tapping into his latent vampire abilities, and when the scene culminates into the beginning of a fight scene, we cut to this.
This woman is to join the Lee family, father? This is the slattern you chose to take my mother's place?
And not even a minute later, we cut back to see the fight over and then to the other scene with Laminka and Doris, which continues like nothing had even happened. I know this anime has a low budget, but that's still no excuse for the rhythmless editing that it's fraught with. I could never get fully invested into this anime because of the editing. Almost no scene appears to flow evenly from one to the other. Scenes will cut abruptly, often cutting off any background music that's playing at the time. It's like being on a herky-jerky roller coaster that must stop every 10 seconds. I mean, does this look like good editing to you?
You're not going to kill me? Ah, don't be stupid. Only yellow-bellied rats kill girls.
But I don't think we can blame the technical problems solely on this anime not holding up to modern standards. Oh no. The truth of the matter is the foundation was cracked from the start. While there are some shaving down of plot points such as the reduction of Garou the werewolf servant from fully realized character to unnamed tertiary character with 0 lines and less than 2 minutes of screen time, Vampire Hunter D as an adaptation takes very little liberties with its source material, to its detriment. Vampire Hunter D, the original novel, isn't very good. It makes no pretensions that it's a pulp novel designed to cram in as much excitement as it can in 300 pages, which isn't a knock against it, but the method of trying to transition from one action scene to another leaves the story poorly constructed. Halfway through the movie, D has stormed the castle, freed himself from imprisonment, rescued Doris, and slain some bad guys. But Count Lee is still alive, and there's still 40 minutes of the anime left, so what do? What do is that the story and its characters wander around aimlessly for a couple of minutes before Act 2 ends with Doris and Danny getting kidnapped and Dee being left for dead, which launches into the final act. Wouldn't it have been better if half the anime was devoted to Dee and Doris traveling together, getting to know each other, and Doris and Dan getting kidnapped at the midpoint and have the rest of the film be one big rising climax? It would, at the very least, make the well-shot action scene of Dee escaping the castle feel less pointless because we know Doris is going to get kidnapped in the story again. The only reason this scene exists is to take out some characterless hench baddies. But maybe it's kind of the point that we don't know much about Dee and his general character, if only because he doesn't have any to speak of. Dee is obviously based on the old Western archetype of a gunman coming into town, solving a problem at the behest of a desperate person, and leaving when the problem is dealt with. He is meant to be a man shrouded in mystery, making him less of a character and more of a vehicle for awesome fight scenes. What character we do get from Dee is the internal struggle of his human nature and his vampire nature, which is why he feels he must wander alone lest he give in to that nature. But other than that, that's all we get from him. Otherwise, he's perfectly content to stand around like a frowny piece of cardboard for 80% of the movie. The man shrouded in mystery trope does work in keeping the audience guessing, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you need to explain some character attributes about the man of mystery, lest you confuse the audience. In other words, let's talk about Dee's left hand, shall we?
Feeling moody today, are we? You're not acting like yourself. Protecting this girl, counseling her brother, and offering advice. It's almost as though you have a heart. Don't tell me that you've fallen in love.
That's enough, old fool.
That's not internal monologue, nor is it the voice of his vampire side talking. That's Dee's left hand, also known as, Dee's left hand. In the novels, Dee's left hand is also shrouded in mystery. We don't know where he came from or what exactly his relationship with Dee is. What we do know is that he's a symbiotic parasite that grants Dee strange powers, which includes bringing Dee back to life. One thing the novel does right is that the revival of Dee is explained in detail in the novels. Dee's left hand can detach himself from Dee, consume all the 4 natural elements, and reattach himself to revive Dee. None of this is explained in the anime. An entire scene where Dee's left hand must revive Dee, otherwise a demon mist that is bearing down on them will consume them both, should have been a real tense scene. But with the lack of relevant explanation behind Dee's left hand and its powers, it leaves the audience scratching their collective heads. Compounding this is the fact that this scene is the first time in the anime we get a good look at Dee's left hands. We get glimpses of it, sure, but never a scene of him talking on screen. He's always talking off screen, so it isn't until this scene where we can put a voice to a face and go, wait, that was his hand talking the entire time? What? And I understand, show, don't tell, but sometimes you might need to drop a few hints or foreshadowing lest you leave the audience completely in the dark. Also, the man shrouded in mystery trope only works if the character is given more developed characters to bounce off of. And we don't see that here. The driving point of the plot, Dora is introduced as a potential sidekick with her impressive whip skills, but gets reduced to damsel in distress almost immediately, full-blown fainting spells and all. And she also gets a romantic attraction to Dee, which comes right out of nowhere.
Don't want you to die, Dee!
Enough.
No, I just want to be close to you, just this once.
Dora's brother Dan is annoying, useless, and only exists to be Dee's cheerleader and get kidnapped alongside Dora. The antagonist, Count Lee, barely does anything in this film. He only exists to provide conflict, chuckle evilly from his throne, and act like the dick to everyone around him.
What promise is that?
The gift of immortality and eternal youth, as you promised.
To the contrary, you should be grateful I let you live. Eternal youth for your repeated failures. I suggest you wait another 50 years before you dare ask me that again, you sniveling mutant fool.
Ray almost gets set up as a rival to Dee, but he only exists to job and get killed off in an unceremoniously pointless fashion by Count Lee. The only character that seems to have any semblance of depth to them is Lamika. Throughout the movie, she's constantly preaching the superiority of her pure noble genes, insulting anyone who dares befoul her space with their presence. And the main reason why she wants Dora either dead or gone is because she feels like her father marrying a common human girl would bring dishonor to the family name. That is, until Count Lee decides to drop this family bombshell for shits and giggles.
Father, can't you see how dangerous this creature is? The whole family is at risk!
Foolish girl. Taking one human into our fold is hardly enough to cause the fall of the House of Lee. For if it were, it would have fallen when I took your mother. The lowly human whose blood runs in your veins.
This reveal totally shatters Lamika and takes her from snotty aristocrat to tragic figure. She is so destroyed by the revelation she refuses to be rescued by Dee and the gang while the castle collapses around her, stating she must die to maintain the honor of a full-blooded noble. The honor of the full-blooded noble, she's not.
Human blood flows in your veins as it does mine. As a Dhampir, you can make your own choice to live without the trappings and flawed rules of the nobility.
But I am a pure noble, my blood pure and unpolluted.
So you see, Vampire Hunter D still had these bright spots, but they were all overshadowed by so much shoddiness. It's almost enough to leave you wondering why such an anime would get so popular. But the answer is obvious, don't you think? The reason why this anime was so popular amongst Western audiences was because it was something different. It was this man shrouded in blackness, slicing up demons in gory detail, a concept unheard of in animation at the time. Animation was still seen as this medium for children, and along comes Vampire Hunter D with its blood, its breasts, and its mysterious swordsman to shake everything up. It's the main reason why anime got a fandom here in the first place. Vampire Hunter D was the right anime in the right time in the right place. And the reason why its legacy began to fade was because it got replaced by stories that did the job better. Franchises that stood on its shoulders and built so many other classics upon it. And that's what Vampire Hunter D's legacy is now, up to and including its own franchise. But that's for another Halloween. So in the end, Vampire Hunter D may have been buried within the sands of time, but its legacy can never truly be vanquished. I hope everyone has a safe and happy Halloween, because when Kyoto Video comes back, we're going to be talking about an anime that's scary for an entirely different reason.
I had a feeling this evening might end up like this, so I used these grenades for a jockstrap.
Oh boy.